Chinese President Xi Jinping embarks on a significant tour of Vietnam, Malaysia and Cambodia, Southeast Asia emerges as a focal point in the shifting dynamics of great power competition. Rich in natural resources and strategically located along vital trade routes like the Malacca Straits, the region has become indispensable to global commerce and energy security. This region is not only a gateway for global commerce, but also a critical battleground in the geopolitical rivalry between Beijing and Washington. What does Xi's strategic tour mean for the future of Southeast Asia? How might the intensifying U.S.-China trade tensions impact the region's security, growth and sovereignty? All this and much more in today's episode. I'm Halal Hamalawi. Welcome to In Depth. Chinese President Xi Jinping is embarking on a 5-day tour of Southeast Asia from April the 14th until the 18th, visiting Vietnam, Malaysia and Cambodia amid escalating trade tensions with the United States. According to The Guardian, the trip aims to deepen China's ties with these nations, presenting Beijing as a stable and reliable partner compared to Washington's unpredictable tariff policies. Southeast Asia, heavily impacted by U.S. tariffs, is a critical trade hub for China. Vietnam and Cambodia, particularly reliant on exports, face economic challenges due to high U.S. tariff rates. Xi's visit is expected to include investment agreements and infrastructure cooperation, while host nations carefully balance relations with both superpowers amidst geopolitical competition and regional economic uncertainty. Chinese President Xi Jinping's Southeast Asia tour highlights China's strategic push amid escalating trade tensions with the United States. Bloomberg stated that Xi's visits to Vietnam, Malaysia and Cambodia aim to deepen ties with neighboring nations, presenting China as a stable partner compared to the U.S., whose unpredictable tariff policies have unsettled markets. Southeast Asian countries face tough choices as Trump's tariffs pressure them to crack down on Chinese transshipment abuses or risk severe duty hikes. While Vietnam and Malaysia seek tariff relief from Washington, Cambodia remains firmly aligned with Beijing due to economic dependence. Xi's promises of investment and trade cooperation underscore China's efforts to counter U.S. isolation strategies in the region while navigating territorial disputes and economic challenges.
Chinese President Xi Jinping embarks today on a strategic tour of Southeast Asia, visiting Vietnam, Malaysia and Cambodia in his first overseas trip of 2025. This diplomatic initiative highlights Beijing's intent to strengthen economic ties with its neighbors amid intensifying trade friction with the United States. The tour underscores Southeast Asia's growing role as a hub for global trade and energy, and its importance as the geopolitical rivalry among China and the United States. Xi's visit comes at a pivotal moment. Countries on his itinerary have faced steep U.S. tariffs ranging from 24% to 49%, creating openings for China to deepen regional partnerships. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road, Xi seeks to present China as a reliable partner, emphasizing infrastructure investment and trade cooperation. In Vietnam, Xi aims to consolidate influence in Southeast Asia amid U.S. efforts via the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Beyond geopolitics, Southeast Asia plays a vital role in the global energy transition. The region is projected to drive 25% of the rise in energy demand over the next decade, fueled by economic and industrial growth, as Washington looks to counter China by deepening economic and energy ties. Xi's visit reflects China's broader strategy to solidify its position as a global economic leader while navigating rising geopolitical competition in Asia.
Southeast Asia is balancing diplomacy caught between two giants, development and self-determination. The question remains, who will shape the region's future? Well, to explore the implications of this tour and the broader context of U.S.-China rivalry in Southeast Asia, I'm joined today by two distinguished guests, Mr. Benny Koch, an international politics expert based in Hong Kong with a focus on China's foreign policy and global economic strategies, and also Mr. John Rosomanto, national security analyst joining us from Washington, D.C., and known for his insights on U.S. foreign relations and regional stability. Well, thank you both for joining us here on In Depth. And let's begin with you, Mr. Benny. Now, what is the primary objective of this trip from Beijing's perspective, and how does this tour reflect China's broader strategy to counter U.S. trade policies and also maintain influence in Southeast Asia?
Thank you for inviting me. So, as the program just said, it is the first international trip for Xi Jinping in the 2025. That means Xi Jinping really put it very great importance for this trip. So this time, Xi Jinping is reactive for the Donald Trump's reciprocal tariff policies. And he's going to visit Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia because these three countries may suffer the reciprocal tariff from Washington. And these three countries, especially the Vietnam and Cambodia, are those countries relying on or depending on the Chinese capitals and investment a lot. And though these two countries are the main focuses for the so-called transshipment of the Chinese goods to the Western market, especially the Washington. So that's why Donald Trump put the focus, the reciprocal tariffs focus on these two countries. For the Malaysia is, I would say, in terms of economic value of the export for so-called transshipment Chinese goods to the U.S. markets is a little bit less important. But I would say Malaysia could be used for the Xi Jinping as an example, because Malaysia and rather than Cambodia, because he is a stern Chinese ally, but because of the scale of the economy is relatively small. But Malaysia is relatively much bigger than Cambodia, and also for this country, politically, it is more reliant on more stick to the stance of China. So Malaysia is now picked by Xi Jinping to show that China really emphasize its relations with the China and the ASEAN relations. Mm-hmm. And so this is the reason why Xi Jinping come quickly to visit these three countries to try to ensure the ties between the China and the ASEAN.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Rosomanto, from a U.S. security perspective, how significant is Xi Jinping's tour through Southeast Asia, especially amid the ongoing trade tensions? And how do you assess the U.S. strategy in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think that the U.S. is looking at this as kind of like a chess match. Xi Jinping is in Southeast Asia because President Trump has been trying to court Vietnam, which has a long history of antipathy toward Beijing, into the American sphere, including offering relief from tariffs and working to build stronger security and economic ties. And if Vietnam, ironically, ends up in the American sphere, that's a real threat problem for China, which has been building its relations in, as you said, Cambodia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, and the rest of Southeast Asia.
Okay, I see your perspective. Back again to you, Mr. Benny. Now, there has been a growing narrative that as economic ties mask deeper strategic tensions. How do countries, in your opinion, like Vietnam and Malaysia, view China's long-term presence in the region?
Okay, in over, I could say 3 or 4 decades. So Southeast Asia, economically, Southeast Asia relies on China, but for politically or the military, they ask for the help from the Washington. It is I would say, the pragmatic and the only choice for the Southeast Asia, because the Southeast Asia are dependent. They have no choices but to live in between the two powers. So that's why they are the first. I would say they are the countries who ask for the peace between China and United States. They don't want any war, because they would suffer, because they are living in the so-called the buffer zone between the two great powers. So that's why the Southeast Asia, even though Vietnam has, I would say, relatively not that friendly relations with China, even though they both are communist countries, but they have war in between the two countries in the end of the 70s. But still, Vietnam, of course, Cambodia, Malaysia, and other Southeast Asian countries do want to maintain relations with the States and China for forcing more closer economic partnerships, and also political and the military. They could live peacefully in those regions. Of course, they could not do anything when the two great powers is going to wage war, but they would try to do their best to try to maintain those powers could be peace in those regions, because these countries relies on the capital from the China, and also rely on the export market to the United States and the other Western world.
Mr. Rosabando, now the United States has been working to maintain influence in the region through security pacts and economic initiatives. Are these efforts effective, or more needs to be done, in your own opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I think that the United States needs to do more. I mean, the Chinese have home field advantage when it comes to Southeast Asia. It's right next door. I mean, it's kind of like Latin America for the U.S. But the United States needs to increase closer ties with with Singapore, Indonesia. I mean, we've been working on increasing our presence with the Philippines and Vietnam in order to sort of neutralize some of China's advantages. I mean, because the Chinese have this home field advantage, it's going to be difficult for the U.S. to get in, but I think that the U.S. should provide more incentives to these nations in Southeast Asia to support us.
Okay. Mr. Benny, given standing disputes between Beijing and Hanoi over South China Sea, will President Xi Jinping be able to accomplish a breakthrough in relations between the two nations during his visit?
I would say, okay, it is still too early to say, but I would say Beijing is could offer more beneficiaries for the Hanoi, and other than those economic, for example, like for investment, for building more infrastructure, especially the disputes in the South China Sea, especially because it is about, yes, in the past, before that, there are some disputes between two countries in the energy in the South China Sea. Maybe first, when I heard this news for the Xi Jinping visiting Vietnam, I would think they may have some implicit agreement. I don't know, implicit agreements that China may allow Vietnam to do some drilling without announcing to the public, of course, because it is sensitive, and also because China don't want other Asian countries to do the same. But Hanoi, because Vietnam is much more, I would say, strategically more important to China.
To China.
I mean, other than Singapore, Vietnam will be the next. So, and see China is much more hostile because economically it is less powerful, and also because the Philippines is more on the U.S. and China don't want any Southeast Asian countries more inclined to the U.S. and Vietnam is still standing in the middle. So China would, I would say, having more trust on Vietnam than the Philippines. So that's why China will be willing to concede if Xi Jinping agree to do so.
Okay. Mr. Rosmundo, how does Southeast Asia fit into broader U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, particularly when it comes to countering Chinese ambitions in the South China Sea?
Well, as we're like half of the world's shipping goes through. I mean, if you control Southeast Asia, you control global trade. So, the Chinese have an incentive to solidify their control in the South China Sea, which the United States has been trying to push back against, but with the Quad and bringing together things like the AUKUS Pact, closer relations with India, and the United States can't afford to allow Southeast Asia to slip into the Chinese orbit.
Okay. Mr. Benny, do you see any room for a multipolar framework, if I may say, where nations assert more independent leadership and balance their ties with China and the US at the same time?
Currently, I would say more independent. If you say more independent, their stance on the so-called the South China Sea disputes, I would say they're resisting the pressure from the United States to stand against China. I would say it is already is what they can do at extreme because they are really more afraid of the attention from China that controls the capital and the investments. But they also have to settle the request of the United States. So they try to. You are seeing the ASEAN always has a relatively ambiguous statement on that is they try not to confront with China and United States as well, but they also for each country's ASEAN rather than having their unified stance. For the member states, they have their own stance. That is, Philippines and Vietnam have more stronger stance, and Indonesia also. But you are seeing the Cambodia, you are seeing other Southeast Asian states is more soft and even more pro-China. So because from the day one, the ASEAN is not as a unified organization, even though it is, but it is just an intergovernmental. It's much compared to the European Union. They are not a really strong unified organization. So
would you call it soft approach or flexible? How do you see it?
I would see you may say soft,
okay,
and you may see also flexible as well because Southeast Asia, they are caught in between in the two great powers. They could not afford having bad relations with these powers at the same time. So they have their limitations. So I would agree they are doing their best.
Okay. Mr. Rosmundo, now some analysts warn of an arms race in the region. How real is that? And how would it mean, or what it could implicate for the long-term stability in the region?
Well, let's put it this way. China has shown that it's less than interested in peace in the region with its military buildup. I mean, we look at the Chinese turning out warships left and right to control the South China Sea and declaring international shipping lanes to Chinese territory, building up warplanes, building up anti-ship ballistic missiles. So, the United States and its allies are trying to counter China and to blame for a military arms race in the region. It's Beijing.
Mr. Benny, how could regional stability be affected if this U.S.-China rivalry escalates further?
Okay, it's a very difficult question for the Southeast Asia because their military power could not be compared for the two powers. What the Southeast Asia do is to doing the things that could please two powers. But if these two powers really have the conflicts, Southeast Asia is really difficult to be the mediator. So I would say it relies on whether two powers having any conflicts in the South China Sea. It depends on the two powers rather than Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is passive; they are in a very passive position. So at the end, it depends on Xi Jinping or Donald Trump or the other U.S. president what they're going to do, whether they could pay the cost military conflicts in the so-called foreseeable future.
Mr. Rosomando, looking ahead, what are the key indicators that will tell us if the region is moving towards cooperation or confrontation?
Well, I think that the key indication will be the movement of Chinese military forces around Taiwan. I think that's the key indicator. I think that the United States views Beijing as an economic competitor, but I think that it all comes down to what Beijing decides to do militarily, because the head of U.S. Indo-PACOM has said repeatedly that China plans to make a move on Taiwan by 2027. So I think it depends on what China decides to do.
Mr. Benny, how does this tour align with the larger Belt and Road Initiative blueprint for the region?
Okay, I would say the Belt and Road would still persist. Even they would expand, especially in the Central Asia, rather than not just the Southeast Asia, would expand in Central Asia, and China is going to put the focus on Central Asia as well, because Russia, even though they are still in the war, they may win, but the economy of the Russian economy suffers a lot. And for the power vacuum, China is going to fill it by forcing more and more economic partnerships with Kazakhstan and other Southeast Central Asian states. And also in the Middle East, and the Middle East countries is also building more economic relations and partnerships with China to try to balance the influence from the U.S. And the Middle East is also playing in the middle ground between the two powers. So I would say the Belt and Road initiatives is still expanding, but the scale is going to be smaller than in the past decade because of the debt, and also the economy of China is not as fast as before, and also the Western world, the U.S. and Europe is already highlighting the Belt and Road initiatives would hurt their geopolitical interests. But for the Middle East, for the Central Asia, which are not the West could monopolize their influence, then China would still have the room for building and expanding the economic power in these two regions.
Well, I'd like to thank you both, Mr. Benny Koka and Mr. John Rosomando, for your valuable insights and for joining us here on Qnews. And as we have seen today, Southeast Asia is more than just a geographic crossroads. It is now a front line in the contest for global influence. Whether this region becomes a stage for cooperation or competition, well, that depends not only on superpowers, but also on the agency of the nations within it. And this brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. I'm Hana Al-Hamalawi. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more updates here on Q News.